Where do we find meaning and purpose, especially when so much of life involves pain, grief, and suffering? Can we? Friends, this is what we are chasing today. Some, like the writer of Ecclesiastes once thought, believe life is meaningless. There are also people who believe human existence has no ground, goal, direction, or necessity. For others, the very quest for meaning is the meaning of life. And then there are people who connect God with meaning. Humans have meaning and purpose as children of God. Full stop. Human existence then is a gift from God. There are others still who think we fashion our own meaning. We can create it. Or similarly, meaning can be whatever we decide. What do you think? How do you articulate your own sense of meaning and purpose? If this podcast means something to you, it would mean so much to me if you would follow or subscribe. You can do this by tapping the plus sign or clicking follow. If you love it, you can also help me to keep doing it by giving it a 5-star rating and sharing an episode that you love with a friend. The person I'm going to talk with during this episode has thought a lot about the questions we are chasing today. He's written 3 books about it. Reverend Dr. Patrick B. Reyes is the Chicano award-winning and best-selling author of the books Nobody Cries When We Die, The Purpose Gap, and he has a forthcoming book that we will talk about that is yet to be titled. He is the dean of Auburn Theological Seminary, a 205-year-old legacy institution advancing a vision where every child matters. His work and research explores how people find meaning and purpose, especially those from historically marginalized communities. Along with being recognized for his service and scholarship by higher education institutions and nonprofits, he was inducted into the Morehouse College Martin Luther King Jr. Collegium of Scholars. He currently serves on several boards in higher education and nonprofits, advancing access for Black, Chicano, Indigenous, and students with disability. He holds a PhD and master's degree from Claremont School of Theology, an MDiv from Boston University, and is a proud graduate of California State University at Sacramento. He currently lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, on ancestral lands with his family, Carrie, Ash, and Carmelita. Fun fact, his partner runs the Turquoise Teapot and Cat Cafe in Santa Fe, where you can find Patrick drinking a cup of tea and supporting his feline friends finding their forever family. My guest today is the kind of dynamic person that you just love right away when you meet him. He has energy, passion, vision, and he's honest in the best kind of way. Dr. Patrick Reyes, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really, really eager to dive into this conversation with you. And it's because the things that we're going to talk about, one, both of us think a lot about these questions. But two, we think about these questions from, I think, a place of lived experience, not just as like people who are like, that would be a good intellectual endeavor. And then third, these questions today come from, and I haven't told you about this, but when I was a professor at Baylor, they did a survey of all the college students. And they coded the data and they asked them in one of the questions, what's your top spiritual struggle? Their second biggest spiritual struggle was, I don't know the deeper meaning of my life. And their top spiritual struggle was, what do we do with suffering? So I'm so grateful that you're here because I feel like your work is at the intersection of these two questions. How do I find a deeper sense of meaning and purpose? And what do we do with the suffering of the world? And how do we especially wrestle with meaning and purpose in a world that's grieving? So I'd love to just sort of start with your initial thoughts on that data. What do you think about that?
I mean, it tracks so much with where, at least in my work with how people find meaning and purpose, and especially around moments or memories that they have. that often I mean, there are of course exceptions, but for a lot of people, the moments that are hardest in their life where, either something has happened to them or they are actively working through, whether it's a traumatic moment, whether it's suffering, whether it's a learning something new or trying on, something new that they didn't know how to do before. That's a learning on that has its own sort of conflict built in, whether it's with people or learning new things. Those moments tend to be the moments that folks find a lot of meaning and purpose. Like I was challenged in this way, or I knew I didn't want that. So that totally tracks. The suffering piece is really interesting to me because it also, I just want to say that I think for my research, especially working with generations that have come before, talking to elders and all this stuff, the ability for young people to be able to identify suffering as one of those questions, especially tied to meaning and purpose, is
Mhm.
is a shift in the culture that they're able to
Mhm.
name that in ways that I think they're in previous generations. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You don't share your suffering. You don't air out your dirty laundry. You don't share the stuff that's happening between your houses, in your home, that's in your communities. That those are all it's supposed to be hidden secrets, even though we all seem to know them. It's really, I think, inspiring. The young people are naming suffering, trauma, challenge, conflict as things that they want to work through and are able to name it. And it definitely shows a different way of entering into the conversation about how they're finding meaning.
You've written two books, and I love both of them. And I think you're working on a third. I want to hear more about that in a few minutes. But your two books, the first being Nobody Cries When We Die, and the second being The Purpose Gap, both address meaning and purpose and suffering and like the relationship between these things in your own life and in the lives of others. Could you talk about the relationship between meaning and purpose and suffering in your life and your community's life that you talk about in your
Yeah, so
books?
the first book, I think I have a direct line about suffering. So in Nobody Cries, I have a line that I'm talking about being a survivor from both domestic violence and gang violence in the community. And it's really around children. No child desires suffering. No child deserves suffering or should have to go through it. I believe that in my heart of hearts that I don't think these worlds where suffering happens or physical suffering happens, I don't think that's necessary to the world for us to find meaning and purpose. And I know, at least in Christian communities and the ones that I am, that the redemptive suffering can often come up as a trope almost. Like if I hadn't experienced that thing, I wouldn't be the person I am. And I hate that. Like I don't think we're actually called to suffer in ways that justify experiences, especially for young people, where they
Yeah.
have no control over their environment for those moments to happen. So I address it pretty directly in the first book to say that I don't I don't think suffering is that children especially should ever experience those things. That these are systems that we have a responsibility to correct, to work to make better. In terms of finding meaning and purpose, though, I do think that, like I said, I find a lot of stories where people, as they're telling their stories, they find those moments, where they were those times in which they found, I want to do something. I want to make the world better. I want to make my world better. I want to change the environment I'm in. So suffering plays a role in there. The thing I've been writing about, or that shows up in the purpose gap around second book, was to say that we have a responsibility as a community to think about how people find meaning and purpose, not just about me, but about how we collectively do that as a community,
Yes.
because those systems of suffering are typically designed, that they're conscious choices, the way that we design our schools, design our roads, the ways that we have access to food or resources. These are designed, and those things that are designed are often the things that also cause suffering. So we have a responsibility to kind of change that so that more people can find what they're called to do in life, to live lives of meaning, purpose as they define it. And that is a collective responsibility for us to actively try to work towards. And so, when I think about the relationship between suffering and meaning and purpose, they're definitely interrelated. They're correlated, but suffering does not cause someone to find their true call and purpose. I don't believe that suffering is necessary for someone to do that. It's just it tends in the relationships and the conversations I have in my own work to emerge as something that help that people have found as part of their own story, their own meaning making, as those moments where something clicked for them, where it was like, I don't ever want to experience that again.
Yeah. Yeah, or Willie James Jennings said, he's, as we both know, a professor at Yale Divinity School. He said once in a talk a lecture he gave, we can make our pain productive without glorifying or justifying suffering. Um, for me, that resonated because I felt like like part of the meaning making I can do in my life is to take seriously the suffering of the communities that I'm a part of the people around me. And I can do something meaningful to respond to that suffering, but it doesn't like necessitate the suffering for me to get that meaning or to do that like with my life. And I don't need to justify the suffering or make sense of it or glorify it in order to do that. I mean, how do you think about that statement? We can make our pain productive without glorifying or justifying suffering.
I agree. As you know, as long as that never becomes a mandate, that in
Yeah.
order
Oh,
for
that's good. That's good. Yeah.
in order for
Thank you.
me to make meaning, I have to experience some pain. There's an invitation here to kind of do some, I guess, some or the stuff I've been working around, like ancestors, around how we inventory our suffering. So, if you think about like the mind, body, and soul, because it's scripturally for me, that just makes a lot of sense. But if you have there's the suffering, the pain that you experience in your flesh that is caused by someone out external, that shouldn't happen. We should have systems to kind of stop that, so that way we don't dwell on whether or not I was in that position, or how do I get over it, how do I heal from that. That's a very physical thing. That's a particular type of recovery that needs to happen. Trauma happens to the body, but then it goes to the mind. So then we think about what's the suffering of the mind. That's the rumination. That there's a lot of the science of the thing of I'm thinking of my own sort of survivor's guilt. Like when I go back to these things that I had no control over, and I go like, why did I make it out? Or can you help the person who caused this to me? With a thing like, maybe I should have been in their way. Just the kind of rumination of things that should have been different. That's a mental sort of suffering, which I'm interested in, but I also lean a lot on psychology, who have done a lot of great work around psychology, have done great work around how do we recover from psychological intellectual trauma, where we
Yeah.
break these cycles and these habits. I think for theologians, for philosophers, for people who are in the helping professions that deal with the soul, there's a suffering of the soul, which is where I'm really, really interested in working through. When people tell their ancestral narratives, what's the suffering that has trickled down through generations that they're trying to recover from, and
Mm.
or imagine a healing from. And that suffering of the soul we hold that, and there is a healing needs to happen. And I think there is there's a new skill set that we're uniquely able to kind of go into in terms of religious and cultural practices, where we're doing ceremony, where we're doing ritual, where we're welcoming in the ancestors, we're casting hopes for descendants. That sort of that work on the suffering of the soul is our work. And I think that's some of the hardest work, because that doesn't have a moment where someone struck my flesh. Typically it doesn't have just a moment where I'm ruminating on something I said that I shouldn't have, or I watched or I witnessed something. I was, got vicarious trauma because I witnessed something I shouldn't have, or something happened to me and I'm still ruminating on it. The suffering of the soul is like the combination of all the things, the weight of the world, the weight that I'm of my personal experiences, the weight of my ancestors, the hope I have for future descendants. And so how do we alleviate that suffering of the soul? What does that work look like? I'm really curious about that.
Yes, me too. I love that you brought this up because I'm really interested in the narratives of suffering, both of our communities, like how they get passed on to us and like live within us, both what we've experienced as a people, but also how we respond to that. And I think that that can be passed on, and those narratives can be really helpful and hopeful, and they can be really painful and difficult, like how we're taught, it's this pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. That's one version of a narrative that can get passed on. Or like I've worked with military personnel where there's like this sense, like the narrative there is like embrace the suck. Or, and there's these mandates and narratives that get passed on. I think that are really they're unhelpful to people when you're really deeply having this experience of pain and grief. So from your perspective, could you give like one example of a sort of communal narrative that lives within you that maybe you never witnessed, but that, you know, what you're, to explain to the listeners, like what you're talking about there, like what's a communal suffering that it impacts the soul that you're talking about? And two, what's one way that you have heard, like through psychologists, like that we can work through that a little bit? Like what's, you know, what's one way that you're sort of captivated by right now?
So one of the tensions I'm working through is as I think about meaning purpose. I've heard a little bit about this in the purpose gap, and why I think it's important in the ancestral work when you think back and for 5, 6 generations is around work, and the at least in the Mexican work ethic is a thing, and the our ability to produce and outwork anyone is a thing that we pride ourselves on, especially manual
Mm,
labor. And one of the things that I found when I was kind of looking through how people find meaning and purpose, especially in workplaces that are typically not surveyed, like I'm thinking of, when I see these workplace surveys, or I see the theology of work or the imagination of work that people often go to, or organizational psychologists, it's like it's consultancy firms, or it's all white collar work. It's always about
yeah.
intellectual labor, and never includes manual labor. So when I like, for example, I was doing my research around a doctorate, I went back and worked in the fields and asked folks who are working 6 days a week, who are making a minimum wage, who have had to fight for rights for protection. It didn't happen until the late 2010s for right to a bathroom, water, and shade, on hot days. What
Yeah.
in what in this work gives you hope, meaning, and purpose to do this work? And answer always came back something that was like very material, about trying to have the next generation have it a little bit better than this generation. And but that had a material spin to it that wasn't a casual, like, I hope they go to a great college, or they do this big, they change the world. It was really about, I hope their material, like the labor I'm doing in this field, which is not what I want to be spending, the pain I have, bending over all day picking lettuce or strawberries, is not the pain I want the future generations to experience. And I hope that by doing this work, that they will have the opportunities to do something. Have the opportunities to do a different type of work in the world. Now, it's not the joy, I think, that's there about finding that is I don't think we can rethink what does it mean to do that type of labor, but also what does it mean to then I'm not working the fields, I haven't, and be a beneficiary of that type of labor, and yet still be formed to think that I'm only as good as the labor I can produce for my kids and future generations, when in the places that I occupy, which is higher education and theological education, that I'm working with a whole bunch of people who assume that they have the right to be the boss no matter what. And I have a work ethic that assumes that I need to produce for them. And that power dynamic hasn't shifted, whether it was from one generation to the next. So what
Wow.
does it
So
mean?
that's what lives in you.
Oh, heck yeah, yeah. No one's gonna
Yeah.
outwork me. Hell
Yeah.
no. That will never be a thing. But what does it mean to
And
shift then the narratives that this production of labor based on people's their the cultural inheritance, the question that you had around, how do we take this from generation to generation? It's good to work hard. It's good to love to work. I think work is a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. But what is it about the way that we've structured this society that certain people are supposed to work for certain others, and other people can work for themselves, or they can be the boss of other people? That their job is, I can't stand when someone says to me, my job is to manage people, or I'm really good at managing people. Like, guess what? Some people who are good at working are also good at managing people too. Like, they have a both and skill set, but because of the body they occupy, they get to say this. And I think for finding meaning and purpose, if we're really serious about to making dreams come true for folks, for them to find it, a broader diversity of genius needs to be explored. That the folks that I worked with in the fields, when I asked them about what they want, what their hopes for meaning and purpose, I talked to folks who are working in the fields, who are engineers, educators, people who are smart enough to be NASA, scientists, who could
yeah.
could have done all these things, but because of the
Mhm.
systems are laboring in the field. So how do we redesign and rethink about this to give people broader access to meaning and purpose? I think that's doable. We have enough resources. We are designing things for people not to dream their biggest dreams.
Oh, okay. So I have like 400 questions right now, but I have to pick one. So, because everything that you're saying, I feel like people are going to be listening, and it's just going to be light bulbs going off. I, if someone is listening and they're thinking, Patrick, like I don't pick lettuce in the field, but I feel like the job I have is backbreaking. It does cause me like internal suffering. I feel like my soul is suffering in this toxic work environment that I'm in. I'm doing a job that I don't love. I'm doing it just to pay my bills, but I want a deeper sense of meaning and purpose. Like, what would you say to that listener?
Disconnect that job from finding meaning and purpose. There's nothing about that, people need to make ends meet. So like the working a job to receive a paycheck to do it well, I mean to live well is important. Like I think that,
Yeah.
I can't operate in a utopia where we're outside of capitalism and all that kind of stuff. I don't have the imagination for that. I wish I did, but I don't.
Right.
I work in the world that I do. I would be saying though that there's an opportunity here, especially if they're not laboring in the fields, they're not doing manual labor, or they're not, their work is not aligned with where they are, is to do an ongoing inventory to one say we're in a new place, I think, especially post COVID, really not even post COVID still, but in a new work environment where taking inventory of what gives you happiness. And that job, if you are where I see the soul suffering in jobs like that is when people are too aligned with the job or the institution they work at, needing to fulfill that place of finding meaning and purpose. And I go back to this thing, like it really is not fair that the folks who labor in our fields, and that's because the context I come out of, that they also don't like their job. Not a single person said, I love picking lettuce. Like this is my life's calling was I woke up and I said, I want to 6 days and I want to be unemployed for the rest of the year trying to figure out where to buy,
Yeah.
cat food for my kids. That there is a deeper invitation here to take an inventory of like, if I need to disalign my job because it needs to be ends meet, how do I do that in a way where I find meaning and purpose? I'll tell you what I found in my study is they named it to a day and to a place. The thing that gave them joy, where they found meaning and purpose. I'm a religious scholar, so of course they knew this. So I thought the insights I would get from my family and friends and the people in my community would have been, we go to church on Sunday, pastor, blah, 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 or, the father, whoever really gives me a lot of life in my spiritual life. But they said Saturday, they said the soccer fields, because that was the one day where they felt off, where they felt free, where they saw their children laughing, and where
Yeah.
they had their whole community there that was that we were all playing together. So there's like an inventory to do around
Mhm.
how do you kind of piece these things out. And if you have the opportunity to say, if my soul is suffering, most people don't hide it very well. Your colleagues probably know you don't like your job. So what does it mean to start thinking about a different way of us having a conversation at work? Like when things aren't, maybe you came into a job excited and it didn't live up to it. How do you have a conversation with your peers, colleagues, even your supervisor, if you're working for someone else, that what does it look like to say, you know what, I'm not feeling this. This is not where I'm called to be. I want to think about something else, either internally or somewhere else, and being more open about and honest with ourselves and with our colleagues about how we go. Because I really, you can tell when someone doesn't like their job. I just say that
Yeah.
much.
It's so true. It's so true. And I think this is really helpful for some people to say outside, like trying to find meaning and purpose in this job hasn't worked for me. It's not working for me. So where are the other places that I can think about? Where do I draw joy from? Where do I draw happiness from? What gives me a sense of meaning? What anchors my life? So you in your own work, you talk about it specifically in the purpose gap, you critique the hero's journey. And I think this is a narrative like similar to other things that we like, the tropes that we've been talking about in this conversation. This is another sort of thing that we pass on to people. And a lot of people love the hero's journey. So could you say a little bit about what it is for listeners that may not know, and your thoughts on like why it's problematic and what you think we should be passing on instead?
Yeah, so the hero's journey, one to say if it works for you, you can just pause this. If you're going to be triggered by my critique of it, you can pause it right now and come back in like 2 minutes. But the hero's journey is a storytelling model that, Hero of a Thousand Faces, a very famous book that kind of identified, said that this is a common trope in storytelling and across cultures. And the idea is that there's kind of three big movements, and the hero's journey is you get a call to adventure. So, think of Frodo getting the ring, something that you've been called to do something. I'm thinking of the way this happens in my community. You're a first generation college student. You've been called to be the first one to go and graduate or to get that job or to break through the glass ceiling, whatever it is. You're called to do that thing. You then go out on the journey. And as you're on this journey, you get equipped with skills, a team of people, think of the Fellowship of the Ring, all come to help them. And you're working towards some climax. That climax could be winning the
Yeah.
game. It could be getting the job. It could be conquering, killing the dragon, whatever it might be. And then, so now that you've done your journey, you have the last part of it, which is the return home. And that return home, you get to share your wisdom and insight from your journey with the next generation. And the end of this whole thing is death. The end. David Brooks is someone I like to pick on about this because he wrote a pretty famous book called The Second Mountain, which he says, oh, if you're lucky, you get two of these in your life. And I said, this is horse crap. What happens if you never get the call? And if you don't have the skill or access to resources or people who are going to help you achieve those things, what if you don't have that big, no one's put that expectation or hope or dream out there for you to achieve whatever it needs to achieve? What you end up having, instead of a mountain you're climbing, you have a gap, a huge gap. This is where the purpose gap comes from. You flip that mountain upside
That's
down
right.
and you say it's really just about making it back to status quo, making sure you continue. And this is how these systems kind of stay up. So my critique was more what happens when the hero's journey doesn't work for you, and disregard the fact that it's completely individualistic, that you are the hero on it and everyone else is your side characters. They're supposed to help you. They're not NPCs, for those who are gamers. They're just there to give you a little commentary to help you achieve what you want to achieve. And my hope is that, or the criticism that I offer was, well, what if we didn't see ourselves as, the main character in our own movie? And what if we saw our lives a little bit more realistically about how they actually are, where it's about the relationships to people, that it's not about living once and doing one great thing or a few great things over the course of a lifetime collecting stories, but really about how we relate to I do the four P's. How do we relate to the people in our lives? Who do we love? Who do we have capacity to love? What about the places that we choose to be? How do we love to be in a place by where we belong, and think about a place completely differently, especially for those who have been moved, displaced because of either migration, needed forced migration, or because they are pursuing something. What does it mean to ground yourself? Or for those who, like me, who have deep roots in the place that they are, what about the practices? Like, well, what are the things that you love to do? What if you oriented your life around having a better rhythm, that it wasn't about going out and achieving something, but it was actually about, what gives me life? Reading books, or drinking a great cup of coffee, or sitting down and having conversation with those people we mentioned earlier. And I oriented my life around practicing really well. This is anyone who does anything in, mastery, like trying to a craft or a skill or whatever, knows that it's daily practice that gets you
Yeah.
really well. It's not about achieving one thing. It's about that practice every day. And then I say purposes plural, because what are the many purposes that we have in our life? And typically people associate these things with the roles that they play. And how do you move in now, though? So as me as a partner, as a dad, as a son, what happens when these things, as someone who works, who's a dean of a 205-year-old institution, had no idea that a little Chicano man would be coming from the West Coast, wasn't even part of America when this thing was imagined. I'd be leading this institution. But how do I imagine myself moving in and out of those purposes intentionally as opposed to accidentally? Or how much time and attention do I give to those many purposes that I serve in life? Is as a board member, as a community member, as someone who's engaging in the world. So if we had paid attention to those four categories and gave that our time and attention, I think it would totally shift our conversation around, I'm not trying to achieve anything except for being in right relation to the people, the places, the practices, and the many purposes that I have in life. And that takes a different type of calculus.
It really does. And I think for anyone who's listening, who's saying, I'm really longing for a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in my life, or like I'm experiencing a lot of suffering in my life. My family is, my community is. These four things are a totally different way, as you're saying, of like calculating how do I move through this suffering in a way that I can still have a sense of life. I have a sense of me, of identity, and a sense of meaning. And so it's like, okay, maybe I can't change my circumstances, but I can think about the people with whom I want to have deeper relationship with. I want to be more intentional about cultivating time with these specific people, or I want to think more about the place that I live in and how I am like how I live in relationship to this place. Like I know I see you all the time on Instagram, on social media, like running in the place that you are in and taking very seriously the animals and the nature around you. And so you have this relationship to the land that you live in New Mexico that's really beautiful. And it's like, that's something that we can do. We can think about the place that we live in. What's my relationship to this neighborhood, to what's around me, the practices and purposes like that. I think that's just such, if you're listening today, I think picking one of these categories and saying, how can I think more, like live more intentionally in relationship to one of these categories in my life, can be really helpful for moving through, getting through, living with suffering, and finding that deeper sense of meaning. You talk a lot in your books, but also I think that your forthcoming book is about your ancestors. And could you say something about how reflecting on your ancestors and the ones that you have known and the ones that you haven't has shaped your own sense of who you are, your identity, and how you think about suffering, meaning, and purpose?
Yeah, I'm about to piss off any millennial and Gen Z listeners that you have, because this next book, the first book was about Nobody Cries When You Die, was about how you find meaning and purpose. Like, how do I find meaning and purpose, especially through suffering and through stuff
Yeah.
that I didn't have any control over. Purpose Gap was to say, I got that, I think, a little bit wrong in that it was just about me. What about our communities? And this third book that's tentatively titled The Pedagogy of the Ancestral, come out next year, is to think that, oh, maybe I got that second book wrong too. Because if I think generationally, like 5 generations forward and backwards, how does this change how I think about meaning and purpose? And so, reintroducing myself, I'm Patrick Reyes, who sits between 5 generations of Carmelitas. 5 generations back, there was a Carmelita that we have a record for. My grandmother's Carmelita, my daughter's Carmelita, 5 generations of Carmelita. There will be a Carmelita. What does that mean for little Patty B. Reyes? It means that, there's that 5 generations back, Carmelita had no idea I would exist on this plane. And in 5
Mm.
generations, that Carmelita might not know who I am by name. And that invites me to think about my vocation differently. What they will know is how we are loved and how we love the world. So I am the beneficiary of lots of generations pouring their love and hopes into the generation that comes before them. And I'm a part of that broader, that lineage. And I have a responsibility to love this planet, to love that Carmelita that's my daughter, and to really reposition my life in ways that set up a vocation differently. I'm going to be forgotten. I wasn't known, and I wouldn't be forgotten. It doesn't mean I can't be known by my ancestors and reconnect to them, because I believe that Carmelita knows me. I go and visit her on the ancestral plane in my meditations and in my work. And 5 generations that descendant will know what I've been up to by the way in the relationships, with folks like you and friends and people that we've tried to make this world a better place. Hopefully they will be the inheritors of something better. But it has drastically shifted the kind of emphasis that what I want to do, what Patrick wants to do, and how I want to spend my time is not as important as how well I live into the backwards and forwards in time of living intergenerationally, of thinking ancestrally, that I'm grateful for what I have inherited, and I'm hoping that to create a a space, a world that Carmelita 5 generations from now who won't know my name, who won't read my books, they won't be here anymore. I'm assuming that whatever libraries will have gotten rid of and not digitized them, probably deleted them for extra space. What does it mean to have set up a better world? And for those who don't know their ancestors, I think this is like conflict management as well. It's never too late to reconcile with ancestors. Go and meet them, to just as that future Carmelita is going to be a stranger to us, and then we don't know what that world is going to look like. I didn't really know 5 generations back what that world looked like, and it's taken a lot of effort for me to go meet those ancestors, the ones I've known through stories, and those who I haven't known, to really try to do that deep investment in setting up to understanding the world that I've inherited. And it takes effort. So yeah, it's never too late to go reconcile and engage your ancestors, even if you don't know them.
Right. I love that because I think too, even if we can do something like we can just work within like our ethnic background
Yeah.
or our cultural background, and we can say, okay, maybe I can't know, I don't have the ability because for whatever reason, I'm adopted or I don't have a great relationship with my the people who raised me because maybe they weren't good to me or whatever it is, or we just lost information along the way because of migration, because of like being forced migration or chosen migration or whatever. Maybe I can think though about the cultural history that I'm embedded in, the ethnic history that I have, and I can do some work in thinking about what is that? What are the practices of those people? How did they relate to place? What were the purposes that then can speak into my life? For me, I love this trajectory of your books because I think that for many of us, the journey that you're describing does start first with crap, like this is my life. Like, it starts with, and the realization, like, I've been through some stuff. Like, and I got to work through it, right? I got to figure this out. Like, why have I experienced what I've experienced, or why has my, like, how do I deal with the suffering? It's the college student question, right? And then, so the first book really helps with that. And then your second book is like, okay, my life's not just about me. And not everyone gets the hero's journey. Wish we could all have the hero's journey, but most of us don't get the hero's journey, in the world. And so, oh, wow, I feel less alone in that. But also, how do I then start to find other ways of getting meaning and purpose other than how I make money? Or if I can't make money, and I'm housebound for some reason or whatever, are there any other ways to have a sense of who I am? Yes, your book says it. And then third, we move to this even larger picture of not just the communities that we've known, but the ones that we haven't known intimately, and say, but I'm also part of this. There's a grand story that's being told, and I'm a part of that too. And then how do I be doing things in my life that contributes to that 5 generations away, Carmelita? Like, how do I not just live for myself and for what I can see, but for future generations? Which makes us much more concerned about the bigger questions that I think that we should all care about. Patrick, I'm imagining that people who are listening are saying, okay, how can I learn from him? How can I meet with him? So how did they get in touch with you? I think that you do workshops and courses. I know you're the dean, and so you got a lot going on as the dean, but could you say if people want to learn from you, with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, and they can go to auburnseminary.org. We do workshops, and specifically around this, the way you described that was perfect. The Center for Storytelling Narrative Change is about how do we engage this intergenerationally and do that work, and do that work well. So I would say go to the organization website, because it's not just the love I have of Auburn and where I am is the team that is there, from our president, Reverend Dr. Emma Jordan Simpson, to the associate dean, Reverend Dr. Shandela Harris. It is a team of people who are committed to thinking intergenerationally together from very, very different lineages and very different starting points, which is a gift to the work. So it's not just about, the takes I gave on here. I'm working with a team I trust, love, and respect that that bring incredible wisdom and insight to help kind of advance this notion that we need that. I think your movements were perfect, from me to we to the broader ancestral vision. How do we do that with when we know that I'm saying this? I want our ancestors to rejoice that we are coming together. I'm not always convinced that they are or that they know how
Yeah.
to, but what does it mean to repair those relationships and repair those ancestors so that way they can see this as a gift, and that those our descendants can really see that we hosted ourselves differently, so that way we were trying to set up the table for them in a way that they're not carrying around that generational trauma or drama. Sometimes just drama. It doesn't always have to be trauma. It's just generational drama that we can heal, and
Yes.
they can have a different starting place.
Oh, Dr. Patrick Reyes, it has been such a joy to talk with you today. Thank you so much for all of the food for thought that you've given us. I really appreciate you.
Same. Thank you. Thank you.